Let's turn our attention now to how resistance is demonstrated within organizations. When I first started to put this course together, I started to list the different reasons for resistance. And I found that this was becoming an impossible task. These numerous reasons are from just one book on organizational change, and I had dozens of other books that have even more combinations of why people resist change. And it occurred to me that too often authors come at resistance as to these are the reasons, let's address the reasons, but there's too many reasons. We need to be more generalized to figure out why people resist, assuming that we've already taken ourselves out of the equation. Let's talk about then why people resist in a way that we can deal with it instead of having so many of these little things that you have to go through as a checklist of, is this the case? Is this the case? Is this the case? Is this the case? We need to be more generalized in our approach. The key then is that every situation is different. Generalization is going to be the essence if we're going to deal with change resistance, because there's too many different reasons to try to organize them. So let's talk about the types. Let's see if we can group though into some generalized types of reasons that we can then start to deal with as to how to understand and eliminate those reasons for resistance. First is, let's talk about active resistance. These are the people that are critical, overly critical, even the smallest details. They will argue, they will fault find, they will undermine, obstruct, and stall progress from happening. To some extent, they may be starting rumors, they may be actively sabotaging events and raising fear throughout the organization. They are active in their resistance. We also have the passive, those that are slow to act. They don't follow through. They will treat the change as a fad of the month, that this too will pass, ignore it, and it will go away. And all too often, that is the case. So you've got active resistance, passive resistance. We also have some symptoms of distress. This is truly distressful. They are struggling with the change process itself. These are symptoms that have underlying causes. The absentee rate may go up. This illness, in which case we're talking about mental work that, just like physical work, can wear people out, reduce their resistance to illnesses, and they may truly get ill, or they may want to avoid the conflicts and the pressure and will call in sick when in reality they're avoiding the change and the stress it's causing on them. Low productivity, procrastinating, and this is a critical one. Procrastination may be a symptom of the resistance, but we need to be careful, because to some extent procrastination is also normal behavior. And similar to what we talked about last time, we are the ones that label resistance, and we need to be careful about incorrect labeling. Those that are in distress will also more likely to be involved with the rumor mill. They're more likely to gossip. They're also likely to focus in on themselves, close themselves out from others, their low morale and their isolation. These are symptoms of distress that people are struggling. These are not necessarily anticipated as likely that they will happen if the change process is difficult mentally as well as habit changing difficult. We're also talking then about passive aggressive. It's not just passive, but passive by saying that they will do something, but consciously not doing it, in which case they appear to be on board, but internally they are actively resisting. Very dangerous because you don't know what's happening. You think they're on board when they're not. We also need to talk about the perceived risk of a particular change and how that perceived risk will impact the resistance that we will see. Here we have on the left-hand axis the perceived risk, low to high. This is a perception, and that perception may be influenced by their understanding of the problem, the context surrounding that problem, and their understanding of the relationship of the context, the problem, and the solution being offered in the change. We're also talking about past experiences that they may have with the change process previously, whether they've had very little, some or moderate change, or possibly a lot of change or prolonged change over a period of time. Let's talk about what this actually looks like so we can get an understanding of how people understand risk and how they relate to that risk in the change resistance. This is a graph of how the resistance can be perceived as high risk if they've got little experience with change, and as they get more experience with change, that risk drops. However, as it becomes more ongoing, change fatigue sets in and the risk goes up until such a point where it becomes a crisis situation. At crisis, it becomes better to move forward than to face non-change during the crisis. Labeling these then: change in experience. People that have little experience in change will think that any change will be high risk. Those that experience change regularly, and this is an argument for the Kaizen or continuous change process of many frequent small changes versus infrequent large changes. People become competent with change, and as they become competent with the change process, they also gain an understanding that they can get through this change. Also, it becomes routine. Change becomes a core routine competency. However, change fatigue, as I mentioned, at the peak versus crisis being acknowledged. The key then is to challenge the organization to have a moderate level of change so that change competency becomes ingrained within the organization, and they can then approach it with a perception of less risk, thereby less resistance to change when it occurs. What resistance are you experiencing? What resistance are you expecting? And how is that resistance being demonstrated within your organization?